20 plus years, I
And
want to say.
he was on the train as an employee?
Correct.
Okay.
He was working.
So one assumes he was standing in a
He was probably
bad place,
walking
probably.
around
Yeah.
at 1:30 in the morning,
Yeah.
doing his rounds.
He
or
could have
whatever.
even been in between cars or something.
Something.
Yeah.
But he was the only person that was killed when the train fell off the trestle. And by the way, just to give you a frame of reference, it fell 30 feet, which is equivalent to about 9 meters. So that's a long way down.
Yeah. Although how wide was it? Do you remember? It wasn't wider than the car was long, right?
I think the wash
ravine.
Yeah.
it was.
It was longer. It was the ravine. The width of the ravine was more than the length of a car.
Of a car, okay.
Yeah,
so
but
there
it
were
was
a
like
couple in
2
there.
cars at the most.
Right. Yeah.
Wasn't some giant Grand Canyon-sized pit.
That's what I'm trying
It
to
was
say.
just a dry riverbed.
Yeah.
Right,
You should just look up pictures. There's lots of pictures.
There's going to be,
Yeah.
It's going to help in a lot of places to
Yeah.
do that. But so Mitchell Bates is killed. A lot of people are injured, but not nearly as many as could have been. About a quarter of the people that are on board are injured. So we have 78 injured out of 248 passengers plus an additional 20 crew. So that's a quarter of people. That's pretty bad.
Yeah. But that's all range of injury, right? That's anything from
Sprained ankle
to a
contusion.
concussion.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. So that, it could have been
I'm
way
sure
worse.
Some of them were. I heard that some of them, like about 17 or 20, were very serious.
Really injured. I'm sure.
Most of them were minor injuries.
Yeah.
But the derailment happened, like I said, it was at 1:30 a.m. It happened about 50 miles west of Phoenix, Arizona. And obviously, of course, emergency crews scramble to get out to the site as fast as they can. Now you might think, okay, well, it's a train, it's going over a bridge, it's going fast in the middle of nowhere, so it was probably just some kind of natural accident. But you would be completely wrong to think that, because as it turns out, it was completely and totally intentional sabotage.
It was.
Yeah, which is kind of a bummer.
Oh, yeah, and we're gonna give some of the details on that shortly, but I just want to keep going on about in the timeline of what happened for the folks in the train. So the crew goes along the train and says, "Hey, everybody, stay in the train."
That's smart.
It's smart. It's the
long as it's
desert.
not on fire.
It's night. You don't want to go traipsing around in the middle of nowhere.
No,
You're gonna get lost. And
Well, there's rattlesnakes, there's scorpions, things
exactly,
like that.
lots of bad animals.
Yeah.
But eventually, people did start getting out of the train because the AC's not working, the plumbing's not working, so it's a little stinky in the cars. And as they started walking around outside the train, they started finding printed flyers on the ground, and those flyers were held down by rocks, which very quickly led everybody to realize they were intentionally placed there. Somebody knew that the train was going to crash beforehand.
Yeah, that'd be kind of creepy.
Oh, that would freak me the hell out.
Yeah, me too.
I mean, I realize there's crosshairs in the back of your head probably right now.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So there's a total of 4 notes are found. They're all identical. I haven't found a verifiable copy of it around to know exactly what it said. Devin, you found a copy.
I found a copy, and it was 2 different texts. One was like a much longer version of the second one, and the one, I can't verify either of them, but one of them was reported to have been it was in a newspaper afterwards that was, they said, this is what the letter said, basically, or something like that. And so, yeah, I can't verify that they existed or not, but it's good reading.
Yeah, right.
Either way.
It is.
It's interesting.
If the long one is accurate, it is a long, meandering ramble about the New World Order.
Like you would kind of expect from somebody who might do something like that.
Yes, and it talks about, it's written from the Sons of the Gestapo.
Yeah. Or was it
Sons of Gestapo.
Sons of,
Excuse me,
that's
thank
it.
you.
Yeah.
So I don't know if it's right, and this stuff is in the copy that we found. Then when you read the reporting on the Sunset Limited, it always talks about how the note addresses things that were done, or is addressed to, I should say, the Department of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, the ATF, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the FBI, the State Police, and the Sheriff's Office. And the notes, I guess I can just call it the note since they're identical. The note mentions incidents that those agencies were all involved in, one of which is the Waco, Texas standoff, which was with David Koresh and the Branch Davidians in 1993, as well as what happened at Ruby Ridge with Randy Weaver and his family in 1992. And then that's where it's signed, Sons of Gestapo.
Yeah, I mean, this letter has, I can't verify that this is what it is, but the text that I found has things like the NWO, New World Order, right, needs to bring about chaos in America so that it can pose martial law, which will be enforced by the United Nations troops. The bombing in Oklahoma City was the first step in creating this chaos. Many crucial records from Waco and Ruby Ridge were destroyed in the bombing, but also destroyed were the records from the Germans who were brought to this country after World War II. Their first home in America was Oklahoma. It's that sort of letter.
Yeah.
And I'm inclined to believe that the letters likely were that kind of letter.
Yes.
But
regardless
I think,
of
The
if that's
language
accurate
and
or not.
the theme. It's
kind of anti-government kind of stuff, but it's
Very.
New World Order,
But
really,
here's
really paranoid.
Here's where the writer's, I think, sense of humor comes through. This group supposedly is Sons of Gestapo. So he's anti-government, and yet he wants to name himself after a very large, very effective government agency.
Yes.
I think he's tweaking us.
That's going to come up in our theory section. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Now, here's the problem with the Sons of Gestapo, other than the fact that they write an unintelligible pamphlet, is that
I've never heard of them.
nobody had. Nobody did before that, and nobody has heard of them since. And it almost seems as if it's meant to redirect the attention away from the people who are responsible.
Oh, yeah.
Very
I'd say
likely,
so.
actually.
Yeah.
Now, that's kind of weird and sinister on its own, but even more sinister about the derailment and the sabotage is that whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing because they bypassed a bunch of safety stuff.
Yeah, it does seem like there should be some kind of safety measures
There are.
for trains. Like, hey, guess what? That got derailed.
Yep. And we're going to talk about the safety systems, and we'll actually talk about the derailment and how it was done in depth.
Okay.
It's something that you basically can't do anymore. So,
Which is good.
none of you goofballs who are listening go out and try and do this, please.
Well,
because
you
you're not going to be
probably-
able to.
But also don't be nervous about it happening. You can keep taking railways.
Yep.
Yeah.
Rail lines.
Well, actually, in many places around the world, they're probably still doing it the old-fashioned way. So there's probably places where you can still do this.
Yeah,
Yeah.
maybe.
Yeah.
Hopefully not.
I think that there are fewer and fewer every day.
Oh, yeah.
So we're going to talk about the crash, but I first want to describe, just for folks who don't know, the anatomy of a rail line.
I can't imagine anybody doesn't know, but it is
I would-
important.
It's very
so let's
important.
talk about it anyway.
Okay, so the anatomy of a railroad, by the way, rail and road, set of rails on a road, that's literally what the name means. It is made up of a series of large wooden beams, which are called railroad ties, and they sit on a bed of gravel, and that's literally called your track bed. And it has sections of steel rails that are laid across it, and those rails are attached to the wooden beams, tie plates, steel tie plates.
And railroad.
And those are attached with giant spikes.
Yeah, railroad spikes.
Yeah. This is really the basics of it. Railroad tracks come in two sizes, which isn't really important in their length for us, but they do come in a multitude of sizes, which is actually, I kind of got into the science of it. It's really kind of interesting as to how, for when and how they align, but we're not going to go down that path.
I read something very interesting about railroads and why they are, 4.85 inches across.
The
and it will
actual
not go.
physical rail. Yeah.
Yeah. It's very interesting.
There's a lot of really interesting.
Basically, it comes back to ancient Greece.
And the
So there you
Romans
go.
and all that stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
pretty
there
much.
you go.
Interesting.
Anyway,
Yeah.
So you're going to have individual sections of rails, and those rails are going to be attached to one another using a steel plate and big old bolts. Those plates are called fish plates.
right, and they're under, right? The rails,
I thought they were on the side.
they're under the the part that the wheel attaches to.
So the easy way, I'm not going to use the technical term, so if you are a rail fanatic, I apologize. I'm just trying to keep this as simple as possible. A rail is I-shaped.
Yes.
It's like a capital I.
It's like an I-beam, yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. And so what Joe's saying is, yes, it is in the middle on the upright that they are bolted together in the
vertical
train.
part.
Wheels run on the top of the eye.
Yeah.
And the bottom of the eye sits on the wooden
When I said
beam.
under, I meant under the overhang.
I
It's
knew
fine.
exactly is the simplest way to put it.
Yes, perfect. Now described a train.
We
Well,
have.
Track.
Not the track. Yeah.
Yes, just the track. Of course, we don't want our two pieces of rail coming apart.
So they're bolted together.
So they're bolted together.
Yeah.
But as we talked about, trains move really fast and they have a lot of inertia. And if for some reason they come apart, a conductor is not going to be able to easily stop the train if they even see it.
You mean the engineer?
Is it an engineer?
Yeah, the
I've
conductor.
always heard it called a conductor.
Oh, the engineer's the guy that drives the train, right? And then the conductor is the guy who takes your ticket
Let's
and
find
goes
out.
all aboard and all that stuff.
Google says engineers operate the train, conductors don't. They do procedural stuff.
See, this is why I shouldn't rely on my childhood knowledge of trains.
Yeah,
Thomas
probably.
the Tank Engine was lying to you.
Freaking hate Thomas.
Yeah.
Okay. But anyway, the point is that you don't want these things.
Whoever's driving the train.
The
They
guy
won't be
driving
able
the
to
train,
stop it.
the person driving the train, to not see that because they're not going to be able to stop it in time.
Right.
So what is done is that a small electric charge is run through the rails, and that is connected to a signal.
Is it through the rails or through a wire on the rails?
So the rails, the way I understand it, and I may be incorrect, but the way I understand it is run through the rail because two pieces of rail don't always perfectly attach to one another because of the fish plate,
Well,
expansion,
sometimes-
contraction.
Yeah, they leave a little gap for expansion.
Yeah, I mean, even though the train wheel doesn't know that, they use a wire to connect the two.
Okay.
And if the current from the rails from one to the other is broken, then that flips a switch.
A safe distance away.
A safe distance away. They say, hey, there's a problem. They can stop the train and then send somebody out to investigate. Okay, that's the safety system.
Okay.
Now,
So,
go ahead.
I was just going to say, so as long as the rails are actually touching still, the wire, it doesn't matter.
Right, but the wire is a backup because if, let's say, it's really cold and the steel contracts and they've separated enough so
Right,
that they're not
the wire
touching.
is a backup for that.
Correct.
Or
got it.
if potentially you get corrosion between the fish plate and the rail.
Yep,
Yeah, got
that
it.
also
That'll-
happens.
Yeah, exactly.
I just wanted to make sure that I was understanding correctly.
Yes, you are absolutely correct.
And my understanding of the wire is that it's over long. They do it in coils. I did. At least they
It's
used
got
to do it in coils.
it used to have. Yeah, I think they used to have a loop. It's not
It
so
had,
much
it had
anymore.
a couple of loops or something. I tried to check this out a couple of days ago.
I love
I
it. Please explain.
Yeah, well, there's some railroad tracks not far from my house.
Yeah, we
And, you know, I know, yeah. So I went over there and I started. I wanted to see this. I wanted to see this wire to see exactly what it looked like. 'Cause I remember seeing fish plates on railroad
yeah.
tracks when I was a kid.
Oh yeah.
And so I went back to look to see if that wire was there. So I start walking, and I walk, and I walk, and I walk. I must have walked like, almost 200 yards. And I'm going, my God, they make these rails really long these days.
They do. Yeah. They
Yeah.
actually do, especially with, through cities. They lay the longer ones as much as they can just because it's, I don't know if you've noticed this or not. I don't know how long it's been since you were on a train, but you can feel when you go over that
Oh, yeah.
thing. And the slower you go, the more you feel it.
Right.
It goes cuckoo, cuckoo, cuckoo.
So
So wouldn't want that as much through residential areas.
here's the great thing about what Joe did. Joe gets out his phone to call a friend to ask about that.
Yeah, I have a friend named Tim who's more conversant with railroads than me.
And
I
I'm at
should
home.
ask him and say, Tim, do they weld them together now? And
And I get a phone call and I answer. Hello? Hey, what's up? He's like, hey, Tim. And I realize that Joe has called the wrong number, but I don't say anything. Hey, what's going on? And
that's when I pull my phone away from my face and look at it and says, oh, Steve, okay. Okay, I accidentally died.
You didn't call me?
No, I should have.
You didn't know
I
how
will
much I like
next time.
trains. I just like
But the
trains.
point is that most rails, as Joe has discovered today, are welded together.
all welded.
They don't use fish plates.
What?
Yeah.
That's a bummer.
Yeah, at first I was like,
You could probably go down to the Rail Heritage Museum that's also not too far from your house.
yeah.
That they probably have all examples of all of that stuff out there.
Oh yeah, and I'm sure there's tracks around that have that. Just unfortunately, these particular ones didn't have
They
that.
update them pretty frequently.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they're welded now.
Yes.
They don't have the wire.
They don't need the wire
They don't need the wire.
because the weld makes the connection, and it's actually stronger and it's a smoother ride, as you were talking about. That's part of the reason they may not actually be using the longer ones anymore, but because they've welded a continuous surface,
Yeah.
you never know.
I can tell you on Amtrak from Portland to Seattle, they are still using those connectors.
Yeah, are they?
Yeah.
You can still hear that clack, 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 clack. Yeah.
All
Yeah.
right, well let's get back to the story.
Okay. This
Okay.
is actually important, though.
It is.
This
It
little.
is. It is important.
Okay.
I just don't want to go too far down that path.
Okay.
Okay, so whoever sabotaged the Sunset Limited pulled 29 of the spikes that were holding the rail and the tie plates to the railroad ties from a single junction between two rails. And then they then shifted one of those rails inward so that the two were no longer lined up, but they moved it inward, and then they re-spiked it down. And the really kind of hard part is that they knew enough to make sure not to break that wire, but what that meant is that as the train was coming down the line, where that junction was, that wheel hit a flat, blunt surface. They moved it in far enough so that the flat edge was now to the inside. What used to be the outside was now mated up to the inside of its previous mate.
I thought your description that you did. I actually did that when I was reading through the script earlier. Even though I've seen the diagrams, that I thought that was a really good description for listeners.
Yeah, we'll give that to folks here. I just
Yeah.
want people to understand, though, is that here's the thing. It hit with such force because it's a flat, blunt edge. It, I kid you not, popped the train wheels right off the track.
Cool.
You
Just on that one side.
On that one side, which is then causes the whole derailment. And anytime that this happens, you can actually see a big old ding in the wheels of the train. So it's
Probably
a
wrecked a lot
hell
of
of a
wheels.
lot of force. So let's go back to the analogy or the description that I had.
I'm going to do it while you say
Okay.
it.
All right. I actually have a feeling there's going to be all kinds of people doing this. If you're driving, please
Don't
be
do it.
careful. Don't do this while you're
Just don't.
driving.
Don't do it.
Just imagine it.
No, actually, here's an easier way to describe it. Take 2 cartons of cigarettes, put them stack them up end to end, and then,
No.
Lucky Strikes. And
Yeah.
then, yeah.
No.
Okay, so here's how you do it. Okay, so you're going to take the tip of your left thumb and you're going to put it against the tip of your right thumb. And then you're going to take the tip of your left pointer finger and you're going to put it against the tip of your right pointer finger.
And hold them so they're parallel.
And they're going to be parallel. And those, your pointer fingers and your thumbs, those make the rail. And where they meet, that's the rail junction.
See?
Devin is showing it around like she's a hand model.
I am a hand model.
Now, the train's going to be coming down your right arm, and it would go across that junction and then go back up your left arm. The train is going to be coming down your right arm, across the junction of your fingers, and then back up your left arm.
Wait a minute, how fast is the train going?
Stop, Joe. Now, we're going to be a saboteur. As a saboteur, what you're going to do is you're going to take your left pointer finger and you're going to move it inward so that your fingernail of your left pointer finger is touching the pad of your right finger, the inside. You see how that's shifted off. Now you understand, as that rail, because the wheels sit inside the rails, as it comes from down your
lip
arm,
inside the rail.
it's going to hit that flat edge.
They have
Should-
yeah.
Shouldn't it be the thumb that moves in?
It doesn't matter which one.
Okay,
But
fine.
so wait, to clarify, it's not the whole wheel. They just have the lip on the inside.
Right,
that we're talking
because the
about.
wheel of a train rides the top and the inside
sides, yeah.
of the rail.
Yeah.
But it doesn't matter, Joe, which finger you move, you
Yeah.
goofball.
All right, fine.
So this is how our saboteurs did the deed, basically. Now, whoever did this had to work fairly quickly in a general sense, because trains would be coming down that line every 6 to 12 hours
Oh,
after the last one had passed by.
sorry. Should we mention that, as we described before, just to reiterate, the metal is still touching, so the current isn't interrupted.
Well, the
Well,
metal isn't touching, the wire is still in place. The wire that connects the rails was stretched. Now, I've heard that it was a long enough loop that they didn't have to do anything. I've also heard that they used what was called a jumper line to add, kind of like a jumper cable, to add extra length to it.
Which is
Yeah,
awful.
yeah.
But that they did it. They knew that the line would be interrupted.
If they interrupted the signal, the whole thing was going
Right.
to, the game was up.
Sorry, I
They
just
totally knew
want to
that.
reiterate that.
Yes. But they also knew, I mean, they had to do it fast because trains are coming down this line every 6 to 12 hours because it's a heavily used track.
Well,
Meaning they
that's
would have had to know the
super
schedule.
fast. Yeah, of course, but that's not hard to find out.
No, the schedules are totally published, but
Yeah.
they would have had to at least staked out that spot for a while to know when the trains came by.
And I guess the other thing to mention is that in these areas, there are some areas that aren't this much, but I believe in these areas, you have one track line for all train traffic. So Amtrak shares a line with freight line traffic, and freight lines aren't nearly as publicized as to when they're coming down the trains. So but you can, if you sit there and stake it out and say, okay, the train comes by every Thursday at this time, you can, but that's not something that you necessarily is matter of public record.
Right. And the other thing to keep in mind is that the Amtrak runs on track that is owned by multiple rail companies.
Right. So there's lots
This
of different
happens
things.
to be owned by Southern Pacific, the spot that we're talking about.
Right.
But yes, no, that's a good point.
Yeah. So it could have been, they would have had to actually sit and think
Yeah,
about
they
it.
would have to stake it
Probably.
out and keep track of it. I mean, that really means that somebody had to sit around and do their homework and really plan this
For
thing
weeks
out.
at least.
Probably
Months.
a good amount of time.
So they probably didn't live too far away.
I would guess that they couldn't have lived too far away. Now, the FBI, they have been working on this case for 20 years. They so far have no viable suspects. I've heard mention that they thought they had a suspect or two, but really it turns out they didn't ever really have anybody in mind.
There were a couple of locals who showed up, and I think they sort of grabbed them, didn't they?
They harassed some folks.
Yeah.
They kind of made themselves, a bad name because they kind of wrangled some people up, and then turned out they totally had no idea what they were doing. But really, they've had no suspects. But then they decided that, well, somebody who did this must have had experience with trains.
Yeah.
They must work.
would think.
They've got to have experience to know how this has happened. But then it was discovered that this was not the first time that a train had derailed in this very specific way.
Yeah.
And
That's
that's
right.
when the story kind of took a turn. There is another train called the City of San Francisco, which derailed in 1939.
So really close.
Really close in terms of the method.
I'm sorry. I was just being a
Jerk about the location and the name.
Yeah.
and the year.
In the air.
1939?
Yeah.
Totally close. Actually, it really... The year is what makes it so interesting. So I'm going to talk about this a little bit, but what makes the year so interesting is that it's far enough back. I mean, it's 50 years. It's not something that I would have known as a young man and then been able to go out and make this kind of thing happen again. It's a long enough span of time that from the collective memory, for most folks, it didn't happen.
Yeah.
So that's why I find it interesting. So let's talk about the city of San Francisco for a minute.
Yeah, it's a good train, by the way.
Oh,
it was. a
It
cool
was.
train.
It
Yeah.
was a really cool train.
Yeah.
We're going to go back in time. We're going to go to 1939, specifically August 12th. The city of San Francisco is heading westbound.
And
It's got
that's the train, not the city, right?
Correct. Not
Okay.
the entire city.
Okay, good.
Just the train. The train has 149 passengers and a total of 14 cars. It's about 10:30 at night, and it is approaching a bridge over the Humboldt River, which is in Nevada. Sometime earlier in the day, we don't know when, somebody had removed the fish plates, the joint bars, from the rails, and had moved the rail line in, much like I had described, but they had done it partway into a trestle, into a bridge that went over a riverbed.
They did it right before a curve.
Right before a curve
Which
as
is,
well.
Which is what happened with our train wreck as well.
The Sunset Limited, yep.
Oh, and by the way, it was also Southern Pacific Trail rail
The
tracks.
line, yeah. Yeah, it was also a Southern Pacific line.
Yeah.
That's absolutely correct.
And actually, our 95 thing is just pretty much an exact duplicate of this, really.
It's very close. There
Yeah.
are some things that I don't always think are exact. So let's do some of this. So they pry the rails over. Whoever moved those lines wasn't sure that the engineer wouldn't see what was happening. So what they did is they painted the end of the rail that they had moved because it was nighttime, so the light would reflect off the metal. They painted, I think they painted it a dark green, and then they stuck a tumbleweed on top of that junction to hide what they had done. Train's going 60 miles an hour, which for our friends on the metric system is 96 kilometers an hour. The first two cars, again, just like the Sunset Limited, managed to cross the bridge even though they have been knocked off of the rail.
They kind of flew across.
Would be a good way to do it. And they came to a stop just over 800 feet away. That is not a good thing, though, because the engine and the first two cars, they go over it and they stay in line and they keep traveling. The next car, the third car, is knocked off enough that it twists and it actually hits the bridge that it is riding across. The bridge is destroyed essentially at this point because train cars are piling into it and tumbling all over the place.
And I think it was that first car where most of the casualties took place, right?
I believe
the first car that went into the
because that car
river
was buried.
Yeah,
the first car that went down, this is not like the Sunset Limited where they're all tied together really well.
It is before that.
They're not articulated together. They came apart, and the first car was underneath three others.
Yeah.
It was the bar car. It was the one that went down, the lounge car.
So people weren't exactly strapped into their seats or anything.
No.
Yeah.
And so it was a giant mess of wreckage. If you look at the photos, if you look up the imagery, it's a giant mess. It really does look like a kid just took train toys and stuck them into sand, and they're just sticking cattywampus. Yeah. That's what it looks like.
I saw a train wreck. I didn't actually see the wreck, but I saw right after. It was just laying there all twisted. It was a freight train, and all twisted and smoking and everything like that. And wow.
It's amazing.
A lot of energy there because, I mean, these cars were all twisted up, and they don't build those things, they don't build them weak or anything like that.
They're not built out of spit and Elmer's glue.
Actually,
they're
interestingly,
assembled.
that Rail Heritage Museum that I was talking about, they have cars that I don't know if they are actually from the city of San Francisco or not, but they're the same color scheme of the same type of from
There's a
Southern
lot of
Pacific.
them in that
They're
scheme.
a lot same with the Sunset Limited, but they have a bunch of those cars. So if you're ever in Portland and you want to see cars that are like that,
I would bet those are the Great Northwestern Line.
Oh, probably. But
No, I say Great Northwestern Line because out where I live, about 6 or 7 years ago, I went trooping around and was taking pictures of old passenger cars that had gone through a fire. And it's really amazing.
it's really interesting.
It was totally trespassing, I admit it.
Yeah.
But I got in there and took a bunch of photos because it was just so cool. But I have a feeling if those cars were stored here, I wouldn't be surprised if others. But then again, the City of San Francisco cars were also stored here for a while.
A lot of them.
So it's possible.
In the Brooklyn yards,
Yeah, Brooklyn Yards exactly where it was.
I'm sure that everybody lives near some place where there's old train cars because they were built real sturdy, not like Amtrak ones.
Dictated the fate of those old cars.
Yeah, if they're left outside, well, it's not so good. But
turns out Brooklyn Yard was really good for those.
Yeah, there's a lot of cover. Well, we live in a very wet area. They cover that stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's get back to the city of San Francisco, though.
Sorry,
It's okay. 24 people were killed.
Which is surprisingly few for the amount
Out
of
of
damage.
150?
But looking at those pictures, though, like you would expect everybody would have
But I'm talking
died.
about the deaths.
Yeah, I guess that's
no
true.
injury numbers in this. But that's a lot. That's a huge number of people.
25%.
There's a lot of people.
And at the time, it was a lot of theories were floated. They were saying that the rail line was mismanaged by Southern Pacific, or that they were covering something up. But it quickly became apparent that somebody had sabotaged.
Well, that was
line.
before they had actually inspected the lines, right? Once they looked at the actual rail, they were like, "Oh, just kidding, that was bad."
So the rail lines were really they were drunk on their own power, I'll say, at the time, and we don't have to tell you anything. We're doing what we're doing. So of course people started talking. And then days later, they started publicizing what they had.
Yeah.
I think that quashed a lot of the rumors and the conspiracies that were out there, the theories.
There was
but it didn't do away with all of them.
Yeah, there was one theory that they got out there just immediately and got on the train and actually did the sabotage themselves to give themselves
to make it
excuse.
look like an accident.
Yeah,
Which
but-
is silly.
It really would be hellaciously hard. It's actually impossible to climb under a train and move the rail while it's sitting on them.
Turns
Yeah.
out.
Yeah, crazy.
Yeah.
So besides having been done essentially the same